office today is a rock wall next to the ocean.
Sounds about right. All right, guys, we're at 102. So why don't we go ahead and kick it off? First of all, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We're here to discuss thriving in a downturn. So you're going to hear from a couple folks here that I'll introduce in just a moment that have kind of unique perspectives on what's happening in the market and what the impact is on your business, specifically from a finance angle and what you can do to weather the storm more or less. So we're going to share some ideas, tactics, actionable things that you can hopefully take away and implement. Just want to say at the top that this webinar is entirely for you. We have lots of avenues for you to ask questions of us. You can either go through the Q&A functionality within Zoom, or you can, let's see, I think we have another way, or just via the chat if you'd like. We have people who are monitoring both of those. So in the chat or through the Q&A functionality, ask questions on the fly as you'd like to. We'll try and get everything answered. We're going to go for the next 40 or so minutes. We did have a bunch of questions come in beforehand, and we have a couple of those picked out that we'll speak to as well. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and jump in and talk about thriving in a downturn. First, I want to introduce your speakers today. So I'm David Campbell. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Tropic. Tropic is a procurement platform and solution that is designed to help companies save money on software, extend runway, reduce burn, all of that, with kind of key pointers, data, team, and also technology. So we have a solution where those pieces kind of come together. By virtue of delivering the solution, we're fortunate that we have advantage of seeing lots of data. We've processed hundreds of millions of dollars in spend for hundreds of customers, and therefore have seen quite a bit about how purchasing behaviors and sales behaviors are changing as the market has changed. And we'll be talking about some of those things that we've observed today. I'll go ahead and hand the microphone over to Stephen, Director of Strategic Sourcing here at Tropic. Stephen, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, as Dave said, I'm the Director of Strategic Sourcing here at Tropic. I lead our services team that actually works directly with the suppliers on behalf of our clients, working through our software contracts and negotiations. I've had quite the round of experience, both indirect and direct, Twitter, Tesla, the medical device industry, all before coming here to Tropic. So this is not my first downturn that I've seen in industry, and we're here to help you guys learn how to navigate it.
And my name is,
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
You want me to go? No, it's all good. So my name is Brandon Bailey. I work for a company out of Salt Lake City, Utah called RainFocus. We're an event management platform where we bridge the gap between event managers and the marketing tech stack to ensure that you're getting the best and most rich data you can from any kind of a corporate event, whether that's virtual or physical. I have been with the company since the very beginning. I was employee number 5 early on and have watched the company grow. I sit in a unique position because I'm a hybrid role in between our people operations and our finance team. So I get involved with the biggest line items in the company and try and help optimize our spend and make sure that we've got a good place to work for our employees, as well as we continue to grow in the middle of whatever the economy seems to throw at us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brandon. Really appreciate you guys being here with us today. So why don't we just jump right into the elephant in the room here. Everyone has seen the headlines already. The bear market is official. Recession is highly probable. We're moving into a recession. Sequoia circulated a deck that has gotten a lot of attention recently in terms of what this means for navigating a startup or high growth business through this new market. Craft Ventures published on YouTube a video where they spoke to their portfolio companies about this market. So probably not news to anybody. Before we move into some of the specific questions, I'd love to hear some perspectives from the panel. So Brandon, you're sitting squarely in the seat that's responsible for driving some of the optimization. I'm sure you have a lot of peers in the space that are in a similar position. What are you hearing and what are you seeing with regard to the shifting market dynamics?
Yeah, absolutely. So we watch the market very carefully, me and my coworkers, to ensure that we are projecting out what the future is going to hold. And it's never perfect, but in general, we watch these headlines, we watch all the reports like everybody else. The fact of the matter is, nobody wants to say the word recession, but we are really heading into all of the indicators pointing that we could have a rough second half of 2022. And so we have taken a very proactive role. And again, I sit on a number of different councils in the area with different finance leaders, and there generally seems to be a trend towards taking a conservative approach towards any of your OpEx kind of budgeted items. We revisit budgets mid-year to see if we're in alignment with where the projections are for the company. And we're definitely seeing, based upon the trends, that it is time to have a very strategic outlook for how you're going to spend your money and how you're going to invest to make sure that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck and that you're protecting your most important asset, which is your people. So it takes some forethought and it takes some active engagement on parts of procurement, finance, people operations. All of those groups need to come together and make sure that you have a very strong and strategic outlook for 2022 in order to make sure that you can ride the coming storm.
Yeah, definitely. And to echo what you said, Brandon, a phrase that I've heard tossed around is it's easier to cut software than it is to cut people. And, obviously, if you can, you want to avoid layoffs at all costs. The reason that, we're often asked, why do you guys focus on software as a commodity? At Tropic, the reason that we focus on software and the reason we'd advise most folks on the call to focus on software is because there tends to be a lot of room there that is not going to cut away mission critical people and folks on the team that you're going to have to recoup later. So, Stephen, I'd love to hear, from your perspective, if you wouldn't mind providing some context, what changes in behavior are you seeing from companies that are really doing this well?
Yeah, the biggest thing is companies are recognizing it up front. They're avoiding the overcommitments. They're making the adjustments to cash flows and how payment terms are working. Months ago, everything was on the up and up. People were able to forecast their growth. They were committing to that growth, long-term contracts. A lot of the trends we're seeing now is people starting to dig in a little bit. Let's optimize our seat counts. Let's optimize our usage. Let's make sure we're not overcommitting compared to where we're actually at today. But also maybe let's dig in. Let's just remain flat and let's see where the market's going before we start making commitments with what we think the industry might do. So there's kind of two ways to approach it. One is, cautiously optimistic, really limiting it. And the other is say, let's do no change. Let's just keep it flat and then we'll adapt. Maybe we'll pay a little extra on an incremental basis, but that avoids that risk and potential of not using those seats or overcommitting or overspending.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And before we move into some of the questions that we received in advance of the webinar, I wanted to just share. So if you know me, you already know this, and I'm sorry that you've heard this 1,000 times, but I just had a baby and I just came back from my paternity leave. And one of the first things that I did is I went on a listening tour because the market changed pretty materially while I was on paternity leave. And I wanted to get a good understanding from CFOs, COOs, CEOs. What are you doing in your business right now to kind of brace for impact with these market changes? And I thought that I'd share some of the stats that I gathered from that to give the folks who are listening in a sense of what their peers are doing. So the first is 10% of the companies that I spoke to are in a full budget freeze, full stop, no new budget for anything whatsoever, no new tools, no new hires, we're frozen. 30% of companies, when looking at their software stack, which for most of the companies that we know and work with, software tends to be the number 2 line item in terms of overall cost next to people. They're reducing their forecast license utilization by 30% at a minimum, based on what Stephen was saying. So we're seeing a lot of paring back of how we think we're going to be using our core systems. Everyone that I talk to is focused on realizing more favorable payment terms. 3/4 of companies have banned multi-year agreements altogether. And literally 100% of companies that we've spoken to are focused on rationalizing contracts in their environment, be they software services or otherwise. So we're definitely seeing some companies taking swift action, some more drastic measures than others. And I think that that's probably a good dovetail into some of the questions that we got before the webinar that we want to speak to. So we're just going to now, kill the deck in just a moment and have a discussion with you guys. We'd love for additional questions to flow through in the chat. Let's talk about what we can actually do and what the path forward looks like. So first question we received, do you have any recommendations on implementing a governance framework to help add structure to the intake of SaaS solutions into a company's tech ecosystem? So Stephen, Brandon, do either of you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I think one of the things it just starts with asking the right questions. And I think especially in this environment, the first question is this a nice to have or a need to have? In today's world, it's really important that we make sure we know, is this a tool that's going to be of additional benefit or we need this to run the business? And that's going to help make a lot of the decisions that are going to be needed, especially over the next couple of months of, is this tool going to help the company continue, drive sales, drive revenue, and sustain itself? Or is this a tool that add some ancillary value that may not be able to be materialized or realized to the company's bottom line. But even just having a simple structure of basic questions of how is this tool going to scale? How is this tool going to integrate with our security systems? A basic section of even maybe 10 questions can do a lot to start to do that initial framework and governance of how you can implement a system.
Yeah, that's great, Stephen. We're going to go off script a little bit. Just received a question in the Q&A. Is reducing spend important in a bull market, or do you only see it as being valuable in our current bear environment? I have thoughts, but I'd love to hear from Stephen or Brandon first before I weigh in.
I think it's always
I'll take
important.
That one. No. Go ahead, Stephen. You first.
Let's give that one to Brandon.
No.
Stephen just had the mic.
Yeah, I am a fan of always being judicious with your money. One, you have investors that you're working for. You've got, a fiduciary responsibility to make sure the company is as lean and efficient as possible. So bull or bear market, I think it is very wise to always be cognizant of your spend. Don't throw money out there into the wind just to do it. But at the same time, investing in the right software to accomplish a goal. If investing in the software is going to bring a noteworthy ROI back to the business, even in a bull or a bear market, it doesn't really matter. You still should invest and spend in types of activities that are going to bring money back into the business. So this discussion today isn't necessarily about just cutting software all over the place, but it's about the strategic decision making around the spend. So, and I think that thought process, it becomes more prevalent, when the markets are on their way into a negative direction, but that doesn't mean that you can't take what you're learning during this kind of an experience and then turn it around so that when you're back into a bull market, you're also optimizing and really getting the best bang for your buck with any of your business decisions. So, Stephen, you probably have something else to say.
Brandon hit it right there. It's not necessarily about reduction, but optimizing. How do you make sure you're using the software in the best possible way? It's looking at duplicative tools. Every company has that, whether they're in a bear market or a bull market. And it's always a great activity to review your tech stack and say, hey, do we have the same tools doing the same thing? Why do we need both? And in some cases, it's 2 or 3 or 4 tools all doing very similar things. In other cases, it's finding ways, hey, if this tool is a force multiplier for my company, maybe it makes more sense to optimize, to invest in that tool, to generate that higher ROI, like Brandon said, even in a market where the conditions aren't so great. If you're getting a high ROI, those investments still make a lot of sense. So it's really about more optimization than just straight reduction or cutting.
Yeah, totally agree. And, we're certainly not fans of saving the maximum possible money on every single transaction, because you could wind up saving just enough money to buy a car that you don't want to drive, right? But the way that we think about, bull market versus bear market, to Stephen and Brandon's point, we think it is always worth some level of scrutiny to the question around, a governance framework. It's worth taking a look at certain types of spend that I think, generally speaking, growth at all cost companies don't look at as carefully. So what I mean by that is, in software, there's this concept of kind of consumption or utilization-based agreements, of which most technology companies are buying some form of this, whether it's Amplitude or Snowflake or Datadog or something to that effect. The issue with these types of spends versus others is that they start out very innocently, right? It may be something that you can buy with a credit card pretty easily for sub $5,000, sub $10,000 that doesn't get the initial scrutiny from a finance organization. But those are the contracts that can balloon into $1 million plus expenses over the next couple of years as the utilization of your software starts to take off. So, we eat our own dog food at Tropic, and we've tried to be really diligent with how we spend, even from the earliest days, and even in, our kind of immediate post fundraise hyper growth phase, we've still tried to spend very judiciously and kind of with optimization in mind, because if you miss the boat early on some of those software expenditures, it's really hard to recoup the losses later and renegotiate. So bull market, bear market, we think it's always worth having some level of governance in place. And by the way, this doesn't mean you have to work with somebody. Like if you're a CFO, maybe it just means one phone call that you hop on the phone, or one email that you send when one of those smaller contracts is getting over the line, to make sure that there's some future proofing in those agreements to protect yourself downstream. Looks like we got
one.
I think also important.
One thing real quick on there.
If you're trying to negotiate,
Stephen, you first.
Stephen, you got a delay.
If you're trying to negotiate in a bear market. Oh, sorry.
Ahead,
you're not the only one trying to negotiate in a bear market. every other company is also trying to go back and renegotiate with their suppliers at the same time. So if you're continuously doing this, whether the market's good or bad, you're showing that right relationship with your suppliers. You're always paying attention to this. This is an active issue for you that you want to constantly work on. Where if you're only doing it in a bear market, you're just kind of reactive, and you're one of many companies likely reacting all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You had some to add there, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm actually going to dovetail off of what Stephen was saying. To negotiate a contract, there's a real specific skill set to be an effective negotiator, to be able to get what you want, but at the same time, the best type of negotiations is the ones where both parties end up in a win-win. If you're trying to take advantage of a smaller software company because it's a downturn time and you're putting the screws tightly on them, it makes their ability to function within their market a little bit less optimal. It's a little bit more difficult to do that. So the key, as Stephen was saying, is to find that balance, to make sure that we're doing right by both sides of the equation and making sure that we are optimizing our spend, but not at the expense of the health of those vendors or those partners who we are doing business with.
Yep, I think that's a great point, Brandon, especially because it could be, Salesforce, it's going to be a lifetime partnership for your business potentially, or a vendor that you're going to have to work with year after year. You want to make sure that you're staying on good footing there if you can. And we had a follow-up. This one looks like for you specifically, Stephen. Mark from Atlanta says, it's easy to say, well, we'll just spend less. We just lost Stephen, I think. I can chime in for Stephen until he gets back. So it's easy to say, well, we'll just spend less, but what options do companies have to reduce their costs in the short term without gutting their tech stack? So I would say that the way I would answer this question while we wait for Stephen to come back is there's a difference between, gutting your tech stack and rationalizing your tech stack, right? So a very key first step to take is to audit what you're actually spending on, go to QuickBooks, go to credit card statements, see what all the different teams are actually buying. I've even seen it done with just a spreadsheet that gets circulated every team, and they have to call out all the different tools that they're buying and see if there's room to rationalize in there. So we see this showing up in a couple of different ways. One way is you have a mission critical system that everyone's using, maybe something like G Suite, and you're still buying it month to month when you know that the organization can't move off of it. This is a case where you may actually want to sign an enterprise contract and recoup the savings associated with doing that because it's a system that you're going to be using long term. Another way to kind of drive immediate or near-term savings that we've seen is maybe you have multiple teams buying the same tool, right? Someone has an enterprise agreement, someone else is buying tools with a credit card. We see this all the time. Let's get all of that brought into one contract so that you're not actually changing who's using what tools, you're just changing how it's licensed and creating savings in the process. And the third, and this is actually one that we've seen a lot more of a penchant for in recent weeks, is the rationalization piece. And what I mean by that is, if you rewind the clocks back just a couple months, we would see that contract owners like the VP of marketing, the VP of sales, whoever it is that owns the tool, especially at a growing venture-backed technology company, at the end of the day, they have the power to buy tools, and they buy them with the guidance of the finance team. Not at every company, but this is kind of what we observed a couple months back. What we're seeing now is that the finance team now has the empowerment because the mandate is to tighten up anywhere that you possibly can. And the finance team can now weigh in on certain decisions and start to look at different ways of rationalizing. So case in point, say a company is using Microsoft Office, which comes with Teams for free, and they're also using Slack, right? Last year, under no circumstances would the people that are using Slack allow Slack to be turned off to migrate people to Microsoft Teams in order to save money. We are seeing companies do those kinds of things now. We are seeing companies rationalize as much as they can to one enterprise agreement so that, again, you're not sacrificing functionality, but you are migrating from one provider to another in an effort to drive savings. We've seen all three of those happening quite a bit recently. And Stephen, just before you dropped, we had a question specifically for you. Hopefully I didn't steal your answer. It's easy to say, well, we'll just spend less, but what options do companies have to reduce their costs in the short term without gutting their tech stack?
Yeah, and I think Dave covered a lot of it, but I think a lot of it is also going and understanding how these contracts are structured. What's driving the cost? Is it license-based? Is it platform-based? Where are some of the opportunities that you actually have control of to influence the cost of these products. One of my biggest recommendations is try to move away from the classic use it or lose it budget, which encourages different groups within the company just to spend to hit their limit so they keep that budget for next year, and move to what Dave just kind of talked about a little bit, is where you have to kind of rationalize and justify a purchase. What is the ROI? What is the return on investment for buying this particular platform? And if it's not meeting that threshold, then that might be a purchase that we need to put off to a later date, or shift out, or reduce expansion on until we do have the right funds to make that purchase. So every contract has its own little unique characteristics that influence those costs and those price points. And that's what you need to look into. Is it user base? Is it active user base? Can we simply remove active users and that'll lower our cost? Is it a platform? Maybe if we sign up to a longer term agreement, like Dave alluded to, maybe we can stretch that over a longer time frame. It's always important to remember you're taking revenue potentially away from these companies, right? And they're also in a bear market. So you also need to find a way to generate value for them, even when things are being reduced, because you need to work with them. They need to be inclined to make these concessions on their end as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. So for the asker of that question, if you want to chat more about that after the fact from the webinar, we're happy to share some things that you can go do right away in terms of auditing what you're using and finding ways to consolidate and rationalize. I'm going to take us back into the top 3 questions that we had, just minding the time. I want to make sure that we answer all of the questions that we got beforehand. So question number 2 is, according to your data, am I sharing the right screen or the wrong screen? Good. Okay,
yep, cool. Right screen.
Yeah.
According to your data, which category of software and tools are companies looking to cut first? So, Stephen, you may have a unique perspective here since you sit on top of all of the transactions. Are you seeing any trends category by category?
Yeah, I think that the most obvious one is it usually is tied to, especially with companies who are doing layoffs, the teams that are being laid off. If your company isn't hiring and recruiting teams are being laid off, you're probably not investing in recruiting software. If you're cutting down on your marketing team or your marketing spend, marketing software is often seeing the cut. It's often related to that particular organization and where the aspects of their group that they're reducing, either internally from an organization standpoint or an infrastructure standpoint, that they don't need. So engineering tools are sticking around. If an infrastructure engineering tool is really critical to your business, we're not seeing as many changes there. But a lot of those kind of support functions and groups are where we're seeing more of the cuts, because it's typically they're not necessary absolutely in this time to run the business. They are, force multipliers, but if hard decisions have to be made, that's often where we're seeing them. And Brandon, I'm sure you've got some perspective there as well.
I do. So yeah, I've actually reached out to a number of colleagues in the industry to just kind of get a litmus test and not just have it be very focused on what my data shows. But in general, a lot of what Stephen said is pretty accurate there, that it is fairly independent, or it's really dependent upon the company and what their mission critical business is, and to determine what kind of software they're going to need. But there's 2 aspects. One, we're seeing so far, what I have been experiencing is that there's not a lot of talk about cutting current contracts and spend. There is, the renegotiation piece. There is, the re-engaging with a vendor to try and determine if there's a way to slow roll some sorts of solutions, whether that be an extension to a contract or pay more later, or however that may work. But we are seeing that, and specifically at RainFocus, we ask the question first and foremost when a new software request is coming in, or an expansion within an additional piece of software, is what is the ROI on this investment? What are we going to be getting back as a company? And if it's just going to be a nice to have type of a feature, or something that's going to optimize a small side project, it may get tabled or it may go back into a committee for discussion, which ties into a secondary aspect to this question that I will answer. But if there is something you can do to enable sales, if there's something you can do to enable marketing to sell the product, then it is by far, in our estimation, heavily worth the investment to make sure that you are still getting your product name out there. You're doing what you need to do in order to, bring in more revenue, because as you bring in revenue, you can then start investing in some of these other ancillary projects. But the key is to really take a very deep dive look into any future request, or, any of these immediate things that are happening, as well as then kind of look at what you are currently spending and determine if there is any way that you can slow roll some of the pieces of software or tools that may not have a direct or an immediate ROI. the way we are doing that at RainFocus actually ties back into question number one. We have a very strong operations team that basically looks at any business systems that are being requested. And we essentially have a steering committee or a group that gets together once a month, and we analyze each request that's coming in to try and see if it does fit the kinds of needs of what we're trying to do. Because again, it's all about driving ROI, maintaining revenue, and being wise with the money. So essentially, in short, if I were to shorten this answer to three words, it's up to you. That's 4 words, but essentially it's determining what is best for your business and then going from there.
That's great. Thank you, Brandon. And we have I want to go to a question from the chat. I think we have time to do this one and then answer the last question from the slide. Stephen, I have thoughts on this. I'd love to hear what you think, since we've seen this quite a bit. Janice from Nashville asks, I've noticed that a lot of the tools my company has purchased in the past few years are now being acquired and rolled up into larger software companies. When these vendors are no longer small businesses, is that a good thing or a bad thing for us? Is an acquisition a good time to renegotiate terms?
Yeah, it's have that conversation really. And many times what we'll see is maybe optimization on some of your current tools. I'm looking at some of the recent acquisitions. Zoom in purchase Chorus. That's going to have an impact on companies who maybe use Zoom in on Gone or even, or there may be some opportunities there to reopen what tools you're using, or do some additional optimization. So at any time, it's good to get a sense of how is this new company evaluating this relationship? Are we still strategic? And if not, maybe it's time to make changes. Or if they are showing a lot of interest and a lot of value, it's a great time to capitalize on that. It's not uncommon when companies get acquired, additional spiffs come into play. If you're not familiar, it's additional incentives for people from the parent company to sell the products to the company they've acquired. So it's always good to dive into that and see if there's opportunities through some additional discussion and negotiation. So acquisitions, I look at it, complexity is an opportunity, and acquisitions are very complex.
Yep. And to dovetail on what Stephen said, another thing that we've seen is that quite often, spiffs or no spiffs, there's this integration period where the company has been acquired, but the sales teams have not been integrated yet, right? And during that period of time, there's a window of opportunity where I think in a lot of cases, the sales reps are a little uncertain at the company that just got acquired about what their territory is going to look like next year. Are they going to be selling both products? Are they going to be looking for a new job? Are they still going to be selling their product standalone? And that will lead to some flexibility and negotiation we've seen, and some willingness to make concessions if it's, post-acquisition announced, but pre-integration of teams. So Janice, definitely a good time to reach out and have conversations about the terms in those contracts.
And I would say, even if you get no during the first time, keep reaching out. That's going to change over time during the acquisition, post-acquisition. So if you just, you don't get the answer you like the first time you reach out again a couple months later. You might find a more agreeable person at that time.
Mm-hmm. We have one more question from the chat. How much can optimizing procurement actually save a company? Many companies need to make sizable cuts to their budget. How far does this actually move the needle? So Brandon, Stephen, do either of you have thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I can go first. So we have been going through a project at RainFocus where we are looking at our spend, and we are finding, on average, just with existing contracts that we've got, we can sometimes carve out between 5 and 10% of the current spend, or offset that by pushing things down the road or renegotiating some of the deals. The big key really is in the optimization of spend is when you find out, when you do, kind of a deeper dive and an audit of your company, where you find that you're spending multiple different line items for the same piece of software. This is something we have discovered, is where we've got 2 different groups that initially, before we kind of took on a procurement piece, 2 different groups bought the same piece of software and are out there running. By reaching out to that and taking procurement back into more of a centralized department, we were able to combine and drastically save money on that front. And then it's also, when it comes time to, it's the new spend that's coming out, that you can put your best foot forward in that initial negotiations if you have a good skilled negotiating team behind you to be able to work through to make sure that you're optimizing that future spend. Stephen, what do you have?
Yeah, I was just say similar to Brandon. Hopefully, there isn't too much because that means you have the right structure in place and you've already done a lot of optimization. If there is known inefficiencies, that number can certainly tick higher. I wouldn't expect it to be higher than 30-40% at the most, unless there's some pretty apparent inefficiencies that are going on. But that 5 to 10 is a typically pretty reasonable in any market at any company that can be driven based just on a few additional audits and techniques and approaches that are going to drive additional value as you look at your tech stack.
Yeah, and this is actually a good time for us to mention, and not to call you out, Brandon, as a Tropic customer, but Tropic actually offers an assessment that is free with no obligations. If you're on the call, you can get one from us, where we can look at your stack and tell you what we believe the room to save is based on some of the variables that we've been discussing. And what we found on average, taking an aggregate, is that there tends to be about 30% overspend in the SaaS category. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can save 30%, right? Because there's going to be some rigid contract structures in there and agreements that aren't renewing for a while and things of that nature. But if you're curious and you want to know, with or without us, if you want to do this on your own, doesn't matter. You want to understand what is the room that we have and is it worth investing in an initiative around this? You can write into Tropic. We have a slide on this that I'll show in a moment, and we can get you an assessment, again, with no strings attached. So just food for thought. And in the interest of time, since we're running just a little bit behind, I want to get us into question 3 here. So how do you approach contracts where you purchase too many licenses and your renewal is still 6 months away? This is the $1 million question for many different companies right now. I'm curious to hear what the panel has to say about it.
Yeah, I'll go first on that one.
Yeah,
so
first of all,
okay, we'll go Steve
go
first since there's a delay.
No.
Sorry.
Okay.
My lag. Go ahead,
me.
Brandon.
So my theory and approach to life is you get 0% of what you don't ask for. So if you're seeing a situation, the worst thing that can happen is the vendor or the company would say no. But if you do find that you are shallowing in on a usage of a piece of software, the best thing, in my opinion, to do is to reach out to your contact there, see if you can facilitate a negotiation or a discussion about alternatives to the payment structure. If there's anything that you can do to adjust the terms of what you've been doing. Because again, the worst thing that's going to happen is that you're going to be committed, but you've already got the budget in place for what you've done. So there's no harm in asking. Steven, you probably have something a little more technical there, but my opinion is look at what you're doing and try to always make, some fine-tuned tweaks to your agreements if necessary.
Yeah, I've got more than a handful of thoughts, and this is what we're seeing, every day in the environment now. I think one of the first things to always take into account is, what did this vendor do with you 2 years ago? A lot of vendors and suppliers recently already made concessions, back in 2020 during the pandemic, and they're feeling the burn of this, again as well. And so it's always good to remember, how did they treat us? How did they react then? That's a good precedent to go off of how they may react again in the future. It will be tough if they made a lot of concessions for you just 2 years ago to be coming back and doing it again. So make sure you have that frame of mind going into these discussions. They are a business too, right? They can only take so many hits. Always important to evaluate the relationship that you were going into. Were they cooperative? Are they someone that we want to be a partner with? Are they willing to work with us? Or is this is a very transactional relationship? We pay them and they give us a product. This is all going to play into how these discussions are going to move forward. I think it's important to understand their frame of mind of that they want to make sure they're retaining their revenue. So how can we reframe, restructure this contract that still shows that we can be a long-term partner? They will still see that revenue down the road, but it's going to be structured differently. Options are, like Dave said earlier, maybe it's extending the contract so that revenue still exists, but over a different time frame. Maybe it's moving products into a different product. We know we don't need this add-on, but we are going to still need some new seats in the future. So let's move that add-on costs into these seats so we're still getting some value back instead of just dumping money into products we may not use. So it's really about being flexible and understanding what is the relationship I have with this particular supplier. How are they going to be able to work with us? Understanding your contract and where is the maneuverability there. It's always important, like Brandon said, ask questions. Ask about your options. Ask if they have any special payment plans. Companies are coming up with strategies for this. They don't want to lose business either. They don't want you to just walk away. So work with them to find solutions.
That's great. Thanks, guys. So with the couple minutes we have left, we're now going to move into just rapid fire Q&A. Saw a couple different questions and answers trickling over the course of the presentation. Is there anything else that's top of mind or that you feel like you haven't gotten answered that you wanted to get out of today's presentation? If so, please drop those into the chat or the Q&A window right now. And if we don't get any in the next 30 seconds to a minute, I'll play us out and we can call it a day. Any remaining questions?
So while you're waiting for questions to come in, I've had a couple of thoughts here on the call. One, RainFocus, using my company as an example, we have grown from very rapid growth over the number of years that we have been in business. We started in 2014, and if I could go back in time, I would have put a more robust procurement process in place earlier to try and control that spend. To me, the best day to put a procurement process in is yesterday. The second best is today. But there's a lot of companies out there, and procurement may not be the first and foremost on people's minds. And this is where RainFocus utilized Tropic. We signed on with Tropic here a while back, and not only have they saved us about 15% on our year-over-year spend on software in our contracts, but in addition, they free up a lot of my time. My job is not solely dedicated into procurement. I've got a number of other responsibilities and roles, and to be able to have a team that is backing me to be able to, as Stephen has said, there are a million different ways to look at these negotiations, and Tropic has specialists that deal with these kinds of negotiations. Oftentimes they're just a great sounding board, and two, they will also engage with clients and vendors on my behalf to be able to free up some other time so I can work on other things. And again, as noted, it has saved me about 15% thus far on my annual spend. So if you are feeling overwhelmed by what is going on out there, it may be worth looking at Tropic to see if there is some way that you can invest money in Tropic to be able to bring in a stronger ROI into your company. That was just a shameless plug for Tropic.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brandon. I promise we didn't pay him to say that. Really appreciate the kind words. We love working with you guys, and glad to hear that it's making an impact. We did have one more question. I think we have time for just about one more anyway. So love to hear what you guys think of this. So given the state of the markets, how realistic is it to renegotiate when you pay? Are you seeing that it's easier to say we're moving from a monthly, quarterly payment period to an annual schedule? Are software vendors more willing to be flexible or less?
Yeah, I think payment terms is always something that they're willing to be a little more flexible on. Many of these companies, they need to make sure that they can guarantee that revenue that's already been committed. So more flexibility on how they receive that revenue is often something that they're willing to work with. Obviously, it's not the easiest sell, but it's an easier sell than just saying, hey, we're cutting, we're not spending as much, we're taking this away. It really just, like I said previously, it depends on some of that relationship you have. What is that trajectory of your company? What's the story that you're telling? If you're just going in and saying, hey, we need to cut spend, well, they're hearing that 1,000 times a day. Talk to them, work with that company, that supplier you work with, let them know how things are going, let them know that story, that trajectory that you're seeing. And that's going to help them rationalize and explain, to their team, hey, this is why we need to offer some price cuts. This is why we need to offer some additional payment terms. So it's really important to communicate with your suppliers in this market and not just be one of 1,000 emails going out to them saying, we need to cut costs today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the only thing I'll say on that is relationships are where negotiations are the most successful. So building a strong relationship with those vendors is always crucial in when you have to readjust on different aspects of the contract.
Definitely. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it. Really thoughtful dialogue, great answers. If you're listening in, hopefully you got some value out of today. Just to kind of play us out, I mentioned that Tropic does savings assessments. So if you want to know what is the room in my stack that I could be saving, you can get in touch with us a couple of different ways, which I'll show you in a sec. And we provide a report that looks more or less like what you're seeing on the screen. We'll analyze your total spend based on the suppliers, the levels of spend and the areas of overlap and opportunity there. We'll give you a projected amount of savings that you could realize. You can realize this with us, or you can realize it on your own. It's just the room that's in the stack based on the data that we have. And if you're interested in learning more in general, you can check out tropicapp.io, and there's a form where you can sign up for a free savings assessment there. You can read an article by me, just got published in TechCrunch with some tips and tricks for right-sizing your tech stack during a downturn. Or you can reach out to Musa, our VP of Marketing. His email is listed right here with any feedback on today, any further questions you have, or ideas for what you'd like to see from our next webinar. But until then, thank you so much for joining us today. Good luck. I'll leave you all with a quote that I steal shamelessly from an email I got from Musa a while ago, that's attributed to a Formula One racer whose name is escaping me. He said in reference to, it's being applied now in reference to the downturn in the market. He said in reference to when the going gets tough, it's easier to pass 20 cars when it's raining than it is when it's sunny outside. And we hope that that will be the experience of everybody listening in today. So until next time, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.